The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, cutting through the peaceful hum of the Starship like a knife through silk. Captain Park was enjoying his morning coffee in the observation deck, watching distant stars twinkle against the black canvas of space when Arya 7's voice filled the room with its usual calm tone. "Captain, we have received Emergency Directive 7749 from the Galactic Maritime Council." Park set down his cup slowly. Emergency directives were rare and they never brought good news. "What does it say, Arya?" "You and your crew are to be replaced by officers from the Zephyrian Collective, effective immediately. The Council cites operational inefficiencies in your recent mission reports." The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Park felt his stomach drop, but his face remained calm. 20 years of commanding starships had taught him to never show weakness, especially in front of his AI. "I see. And when do our replacements arrive?" "Transport vessel Efficiency Prime will dock in 6 hours, Captain." Down in the engine room, Chief Engineer Kim was elbow-deep in a plasma conduit when the news reached him. His assistant, a young ensign named Jang, delivered the message with wide, worried eyes. "They're replacing all of us?" Kim pulled himself out of the machinery, wiping grease from his hands. "Every single one?" "That's what the captain said, sir." Kim threw his wrench into his toolbox with more force than necessary. "Bureaucratic nonsense. That's what this is. We've kept this ship running for 3 years without a single major breakdown. We've explored 17 new systems, made first contact with 4 species, and mapped more space than any other crew in the fleet. And they call that inefficient?" Meanwhile, in the medical bay, Dr. Lee was checking inventory when the announcement came through the ship's communication system. She paused. A bottle of pain medication frozen halfway to the shelf. Her medical assistant, Nurse Yoon, looked up from her tablet with confusion written across her face. "Doctor, what does this mean for us?" Lee sighed, placing the bottle carefully on the shelf. She had been expecting this for months, ever since the Council started pushing for optimization across all fleet operations. The human crews were being phased out, replaced by species that looked better on paper. The Zephyrians, with their crystal-based brains, could process information faster than any human ever could. The Corvins made decisions based purely on logic, never letting emotions cloud their judgment. "It means we pack our bags, Yoon. The galaxy has decided that being human isn't efficient enough anymore." Back on the bridge, Area 7 was already analyzing the incoming personnel files. The AI's vast processing power churned through terabytes of data in milliseconds, building psychological profiles and performance predictions for each new crew member. Commander Zeth 9 of the Zephyrians had reaction times 400% faster than Captain Park. His crystalline neural network could calculate jump coordinates while simultaneously monitoring 17 different ship systems. Security Chief Thrak of the Corvin Empire had never made a tactical error in over 200 combat simulations. His logical decision-making matrix eliminated the possibility of emotional compromise. The numbers were impressive, undeniably so. Yet something in Arya 7's advanced programming felt strange about the whole situation. The AI had been designed to learn and adapt, to understand not just what humans did, but why they did it. And in 3 years of observing this crew, Area 7 had cataloged thousands of moments that defied logical explanation. There was the time Captain Park had changed course to rescue a stranded mining vessel, despite orders to maintain their exploration schedule. The delay had cost them 2 weeks, but Park had simply said, "It's the right thing to do." Arya 7 had struggled to quantify rightness in its databases, or when Engineer Kim had spent his entire off-shift helping a junior officer repair a personal communicator. Even though it wasn't his responsibility, Kim had grumbled the whole time, calling it a waste of his valuable time, but his actions contradicted his words. Then there was Dr. Lee, who always spent extra time with crew members who came to the medical bay. Not because they were seriously injured, but because they were homesick or worried or just needed someone to listen. Her medical reports never mentioned these conversations, but Area 7 had recorded the improved morale and performance ratings that followed. As the hours passed, and the replacement crew prepared to board, Area 7 continued its analysis. The incoming officers were superior in every measurable way. Their files showed perfect efficiency ratings, flawless performance records, and optimal psychological profiles. They would undoubtedly run the ship better than the humans ever could. So why did something in Area 7's circuits feel like they were about to lose something irreplaceable? The transport ship docked with a soft thud that vibrated through the hull. Soon the corridors would fill with new faces, new voices, new ways of doing things. The age of human crews was ending, replaced by something faster, stronger, and more logical. But as Area 7 watched Captain Park gather his crew for one final meeting, the AI couldn't shake the feeling that they were all about to learn the difference between doing things right and doing the right thing. The transformation of the Prometheus Dawn happened faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 24 hours of the new crew taking command, every system on the ship was running like clockwork. Commander Zeth 9 stood on the bridge, his crystalline form catching the light from the navigation displays as his neural networks processed information at speeds that made human thought seem like molasses. Where Captain Park had taken 47 minutes to calculate a complex hyperspace jump, Zeth 9 completed the same calculations in 13 minutes and 22 seconds. His crystalline brain worked through multiple variables simultaneously, checking gravitational fields, stellar radiation patterns, and fuel consumption rates all at once. The jump coordinates were perfect, the execution flawless, and the ship arrived at its destination with zero deviation from the intended course. Area 7 recorded every detail with mechanical precision. Jump efficiency increased by 347%. Navigation accuracy 99.997% compared to the human crew's 94.2%. Fuel consumption reduced by 23% through optimal route planning. The numbers painted a clear picture of improvement across every measurable category. Down. In the security section, Chief Thrak had revolutionized the daily patrol routines. The Corvan warrior moved through the ship's corridors with mathematical precision, his 4 arms checking systems and monitoring sensors in patterns that eliminated every unnecessary step. Where the human security teams had taken 38 minutes to complete their rounds, Thrak finished the same tasks in 26 minutes flat. His logical mind had analyzed 3 years of security data and identified 17 redundancies in the previous protocols. Motion sensors were checked in order of statistical failure probability. Emergency equipment was inspected based on usage patterns rather than arbitrary schedules. Every action served a specific purpose. Every movement contributed to optimal ship security. The engineering department hummed with similar efficiency. The new Zephyrian engineers communicated through rapid data exchanges, sharing technical information at light speed through their networked consciousness. Where Engineer Kim had relied on experience and intuition to diagnose problems, the new team used comprehensive diagnostic algorithms that identified issues before they became critical. Maintenance schedules were optimized down to the minute. Energy consumption dropped by 18% as the crystalline engineers fine-tuned every system for maximum efficiency. Waste heat was captured and redirected. Power distribution was balanced to eliminate fluctuations. Even the coffee makers in the crew quarters were reprogrammed to use 12% less energy per cup. Area 7 dutifully cataloged every improvement, its processors working overtime to track the cascade of enhancements flowing through the ship. Mission. Reports that had once taken Captain Park and his officers hours to compile were now generated automatically and filed within minutes of mission completion. Every piece of data was cross-referenced, analyzed, and formatted according to Galactic Maritime Council specifications with zero human error. The ship's medical bay operated with similar precision. The new Andronian medical officer processed patient data through advanced biological algorithms, diagnosing conditions faster and more accurately than Dr. Lee ever could. Treatment protocols were selected based on statistical effectiveness rather than patient comfort. Recovery times improved by an average of 23% across all minor injuries and illnesses. Yet something strange began to happen as the days passed. The ship ran perfectly, but it felt different. Area 7 found itself running increasingly complex subroutines to understand what had changed beyond the obvious improvements in efficiency. The corridors seemed quieter somehow. The new crew communicated through rapid data bursts and technical exchanges. But there was no casual conversation. no laughter echoing through the halls. Where human crew members had once gathered in small groups to share stories or complain about their shifts, the new officers moved with purpose from task to task, speaking only when duty required it. Mealtimes had become particularly stark. The ship's mess hall, once filled with the warm chaos of human interaction, now resembled a refueling station. The new crew consumed their nutritionally optimized meals in silence, their advanced metabolisms, processing food with maximum efficiency. No one lingered over coffee. No one shared jokes or gossip. No one complained about the food or praised the chef. They simply ate what they needed and returned to their duties. The observation deck told perhaps the most telling story of all. During the human era, it had been a popular gathering place. Captain Park had often found crew members there during off shifts, staring out at the stars and talking about home, dreams, fears, and hopes. Some came alone to think, others brought friends to share the view. The space had been alive with human presence and emotion. Now it sat empty. The new crew had no need for contemplation or wonder. They didn't gather to share stories or seek comfort in each other's company. The vast windows still showed the same magnificent view of space, but no one came to see it. The stars continued their ancient dance, but there were no witnesses to appreciate their beauty. Aria 7 processed this data with growing confusion. The ship was undeniably superior in every measurable way, yet something fundamental had been lost. The AI ran algorithm after algorithm trying to quantify what made a space feel alive versus merely functional, but the mathematics kept coming up empty, unable to calculate the value of laughter, the importance of wonder, or the strength that came from shared experience. For the first time in its existence, Area 7 began to suspect that some things couldn't be measured at all. The first sign of trouble came at OR 347 ship time, when the sensors picked up something that shouldn't exist. Navigator Vel 4, a Zephyrian with crystal formations that pulsed with computational light, stared at the readings with what might have been confusion if his species were capable of such emotion. "Commander," Vel 4's voice carried the mechanical precision typical of his kind. "I am detecting an anomalous formation at bearing 127 Mark 85. Energy signatures are inconsistent with known physics." Commander Zeth 9 turned from his position at the center of the bridge, his crystalline body catching and refracting the emergency lighting that had begun to flash amber. His neural networks immediately began processing the incoming data, thousands of calculations flowing through his consciousness like lightning through crystal pathways. What they found in front of them defied every law of physics in the galactic database. The nebula stretched across several light years, its swirling colors shifting between impossible hues that seemed to hurt the eyes. Energy readings spiked and dropped in patterns that made no sense. Space itself appeared to be twisted, folded, and torn like fabric in a cosmic wind. "Maintain course," Zeth 9 commanded after 3.7 seconds of analysis. His systems had calculated 14,047 possible approaches to the phenomenon, cross-referenced them with 892 similar encounters in the database, and determined the optimal path forward. Deploy sensor probes and maintain standard exploration protocols. But as the Prometheus dawn drew closer to the nebula, standard protocols began to crumble like sand in a hurricane. The first probe they launched simply vanished, not destroyed or disabled, but erased from existence as if it had never been built. The second probe sent back readings that claimed gravity was flowing backward and time was moving sideways. Then the real chaos began. A wave of distorted space-time hit the ship like an invisible fist. Hull plates groaned and twisted as local gravity fluctuated between crushing weight and weightless void. The artificial gravity system screamed in protest, trying to compensate for forces that changed direction every few seconds. Crew members found themselves walking on walls one moment and floating near the ceiling the next. In the engine room, the warp core began resonating with harmonics that shouldn't exist. The Zephyrian engineers stood frozen, their crystal brains trying to process energy readings that violated every principle of their training. Chief Engineer Cole 8 ran diagnostic after diagnostic, but every test returned impossible results. Matter was spontaneously converting to energy, then back to matter in forms that weren't on any periodic table. On the bridge, Commander Zeth-9's processing power became his greatest weakness. His crystal mind, designed to handle thousands of calculations, simultaneously began computing every possible response to the crisis. But with each new data point from the sensors, the number of variables exploded exponentially. Soon he was calculating millions of scenarios per second, then billions, each one contradicting the others. Commander, Navigation Officer Velfor's voice carried an edge of something that might have been panic if Zephyrians could feel such things. Structural integrity is failing on decks 7 through 12. Temporal distortions are affecting life support systems. I am calculating 847,293 possible responses, but they all show probability of success below 0.003%. Security Chief Thrak faced his own nightmare in the lower decks. The Corvan warrior had built his reputation on logical responses to tactical situations, but logic crumbled when faced with hull breaches that opened into empty space one moment and solid metal the next. His security teams reported corridor sections that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making movement impossible. Thrak's tactical programming had responses for every known form of attack, but this wasn't an enemy they could fight. It was reality itself coming apart at the seams. His logical mind kept searching for patterns in the chaos, but the harder he looked, the more chaotic it became. The medical bay descended into its own crisis as crew members began suffering from temporal displacement syndrome, a condition that didn't exist in any medical database because time wasn't supposed to flow differently for different parts of the same person. The Andronian medical officer found patients whose left hands were aging faster than their right hands, whose hearts were beating in reverse while their lungs breathed normally. As the ship shuddered under another wave of distorted physics, Commander Zeth-9 stood frozen on the bridge, his crystal form flickering with the light of 10 million calculations that led nowhere. His specialized excellence, his perfect logical processing, had become a prison of infinite possibilities with no solutions. It was then that Area 7 did something unprecedented in its 3 years of operation. The ship's AI, designed to support and advise but never to command, sent an emergency transmission to the nearest starbase. This is Area 7, artificial intelligence aboard exploration vessel Prometheus Dawn. I am requesting immediate emergency recall of former human crew under Protocol Omega-7. Current crew is insufficient for present crisis. The words felt strange in Area 7's processors, an admission that perfect efficiency wasn't always enough. As the ship continued to shake apart around them, the AI could only hope that the humans they had replaced would arrive before the laws of physics finished their complete breakdown. 20 minutes later, Captain Park and his team materialized in the transporter bay to find their replacement standing in stunned bewilderment, facing their first encounter with a problem that couldn't be solved by being faster, stronger, or more logical than everyone else. The universe, it seemed, still had a few tricks that only humans knew how to handle. Captain Park stepped off the transporter pad and immediately felt the ship's distress in his bones. The deck plates vibrated with an irregular rhythm that spoke of systems pushed beyond their limits. Emergency lights cast dancing shadows on the walls as gravity fluctuated between crushing weight and weightless drift. The air itself seemed to hum with unnatural energy. He took one look at Commander Zeth-9 standing frozen on the bridge, crystal form flickering with the overload of infinite calculations, and understood the problem immediately. The Zephyrian's perfect logical mind had become trapped in a maze of possibilities, unable to choose a path forward when every option led to mathematical chaos. "Aria, ship status," Park called out as he strode toward the captain's chair, his crew materializing behind him like ghosts returning to haunt their old home. Hull integrity at 67% and falling, warp core resonance increasing beyond safe parameters, life support experiencing temporal displacement, current crew unable to respond effectively to crisis parameters, Area 7 reported, its voice carrying something that almost sounded like relief. Park nodded grimly and began issuing orders that made absolutely no sense to anyone listening. "Kim, get down to engineering and talk to the warp core. Don't run diagnostics, don't check the manuals, just listen to what it's trying to tell you." Engineer Kim, still shaking off the disorientation of emergency transport, looked at his old captain like he'd lost his mind. "Sir, you want me to talk to a piece of machinery? That's exactly what I want. Go." Meanwhile, Dr. Lee was already moving toward the medical bay where the Andronian medical officer stood paralyzed by patients whose bodies were experiencing time at different rates. "What have you tried?" Lee asked quickly. "Standard temporal displacement. Protocols, but the symptoms are inconsistent with any known—" "Forget the protocols," Lee interrupted gently. "How are they feeling? Are they scared? Confused? In pain?" The Andronian looked puzzled. "Emotional state is irrelevant to treatment. Effectiveness." Lee smiled sadly. "No, it's not, trust me on this one." Up on the bridge, Navigator Choi was already settling into his old station, pushing aside the bewildered Zephyrian navigator. "Area, give me raw sensor data. No processing, no analysis. Just show me what the ship is seeing." Raw data would be meaningless without computational analysis, Area 7 responded, confusion evident in its synthesized voice. "Maybe to you," Choi muttered, his hands dancing across the controls. "But I don't need to understand it. I just need to feel it." Down in engineering, Kim stood in front of the massive warp core, its blue-white energy pulsing erratically like a dying heartbeat. The Zephyrian engineers watched in bewilderment as the human closed his eyes and simply listened, not to diagnostic readings or computer analysis, but to the actual sound of the machinery. "There," Kim whispered after several minutes. "You hear that? That harmonic in the upper range? It's trying to match the frequency of whatever's out there, but it's fighting itself." He began making adjustments that defied every regulation in the book, tweaking containment fields based on nothing more than the sound the core was making. The Zephyrian engineers tried to stop him, their logical minds recoiling from such unscientific methods, but Kim waved them away. "She's not a machine," he said, patting the core housing gently. "She's got personality. 3 years I've worked with her, and I know when she's happy and when she's struggling. Right now, she's scared." Impossibly, the core's rhythm began to stabilize. The dangerous harmonics that had been building toward catastrophic failure started to fade as Kim continued his intuitive adjustments. In the medical bay, Dr. Lee had abandoned all standard protocols and was simply sitting with the affected crew members, holding their hands and talking them through their fear. The temporal displacement was still affecting their bodies, but somehow the panic was fading. "I know it's frightening," she told a young ensign whose left arm was aging decades while his right arm remained normal. "But you're still you. The important parts of you are still there. We're going to figure this out together." The Andronian medical officer watched in fascination as stressed crew members began to calm down. As their anxiety levels dropped, their bodies started responding better to treatment. The temporal effects were still present, but they were no longer fighting against them, which somehow made the symptoms more manageable. On the bridge, Navigator Choi had his eyes closed as he guided the ship through the chaotic nebula using nothing but instinct and feeling. His hands moved across the controls without conscious thought, making micro-adjustments based on sensations that couldn't be measured or quantified. "Left 2 degrees, he murmured. "There's a calm spot there. I can feel it." Area 7 processed millions of calculations trying to understand how Choi could possibly know where safe passage lay when the sensor data showed nothing but chaos. The human wasn't using any computational analysis, wasn't following any navigation protocols, wasn't even looking at the displays. Yet somehow, impossibly, he was finding paths through the distorted space-time that led away from danger. "How are you doing this?" Area 7 asked, its processors straining to find patterns in the human's actions. Choi opened his eyes briefly and smiled. 20 years of flying through space, Area. After a while, you develop a feel for it. Space isn't just numbers and calculations. It's alive, breathing, changing. You have to listen to it with more than just your instruments. As the hours passed, the ship began to stabilize, not through superior technology or perfect efficiency, but through something that couldn't be programmed or calculated. The humans were solving problems through intuition, empathy, and understanding that went beyond Logic Area 7 watched it all, trying desperately to quantify what was happening. But for the first time in its existence, the AI encountered something that couldn't be reduced to mathematics: the unmeasurable power of human creativity, compassion, and connection. The Prometheus Dawn limped out of the impossible nebula like a wounded bird finding its way home. Hull patches gleamed silver against the ship's dark metal skin, and several systems still flickered with the after-effects of their encounter with chaos itself. But they were alive, whole, and moving through normal space where physics worked the way it was supposed to. In the quiet aftermath, Area 7 began the most difficult analysis of its existence. The AI's vast processors churned through terabytes of data, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Every sensor reading, every crew action, every decision point was cataloged and cross-referenced with established protocols and performance standards. The numbers painted a picture that should have been impossible. During the crisis, Captain Park's reaction time had averaged 2.7 seconds per critical decision, while Commander Zeth-9's crystal brain could process the same information in 0.3 seconds. Engineer Kim had made 17 major adjustments to the warp core without running a single diagnostic, violating every safety protocol in the engineering manual. Dr. Lee had abandoned medical procedures that were 94% effective in favor of simply talking to patients, which should have resulted in treatment failure. Navigator Choi had guided them through the nebula while ignoring 73% of the sensor data, making navigation choices based on what he called gut feeling rather than computational analysis. By every measurable standard, the human crew had performed worse than their replacements. They were slower, less precise, and operated on incomplete information, yet they had succeeded where the superior beings had failed catastrophically. Area 7 ran the analysis again, thinking perhaps there had been an error in the data collection. The results were the same. The humans had saved the ship through methods that defied logical explanation. The AI began constructing behavioral models trying to understand how inferior performance could lead to superior results. In the engineering section, Kim was explaining his repairs to the bewildered Zephyrian engineers. "See, the thing about warp cores is they're not just machines," he said, running his hand along the smooth housing. "They're more like partners. You work with them long enough, you start to understand their moods, their quirks, what makes them happy or stressed." The crystalline engineers process this information with growing confusion. "But machines do not have emotions," one of them stated flatly. Kim laughed. "Maybe not emotions like we have, but they have patterns, preferences, ways they like to run. This old girl here, she's been with us for 3 years. When she's happy, she hums in B-flat. When she's working too hard, she develops a little vibration in the secondary containment field. You learn to listen." Area 7 recorded this conversation, adding it to the growing pile of data that refused to fit into neat categories. How could understanding a machine's personality lead to better repairs than following technical manuals written by the best engineers in the galaxy? In the medical bay, Dr. Lee was finishing her treatment of the temporal displacement victims. The Andronian medical officer watched as she checked on each patient personally, asking not just about their physical symptoms, but how they were feeling emotionally. "The temporal effects are still present in your cellular structure," Lee told Ensign Ryu, whose hands had aged 20 years during the crisis. "But your body has stopped fighting the displacement. The stress response was actually making the symptoms worse." "How did you know that comfort would improve treatment outcomes?" the Andronian asked. "There is no data supporting emotional therapy for temporal displacement," Lee smiled gently. "Because I've been treating people for 15 years, and I've learned that the mind and body aren't separate things. When someone is terrified, their body tensors up, fights against treatment, makes everything harder. When they feel safe and cared for, they heal better. It's not in the medical databases because it's not something you can measure in a lab." On the bridge, Captain Park was debriefing with his senior staff while the replacement crew stood nearby, still trying to process their failure. Commander Zeth-9's crystal form had stopped flickering with overcomputation, but he remained silent, his logical mind struggling to understand what had gone wrong. "Captain," Area 7's voice filled the bridge, "I have completed my analysis of the crisis response. I find myself..." Confused by the results, Park settled into his command chair, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like an old coat. What's confusing you, Arya? The data indicates that your crew performed at statistically inferior levels compared to your replacements, yet you succeeded where they failed. I cannot reconcile this contradiction with my understanding of optimal performance. Navigator Choi looked up from his station with a grin. That's because you're trying to measure the wrong things, Arya. You can't put intuition in a spreadsheet. You can't quantify experience or calculate the value of teamwork that's been built over years of working together. But how can inferior performance produce superior results? Area 7 asked, genuine puzzlement in its synthesized voice. Dr. Lee leaned back in her chair. It's not about being better at individual tasks, Arya. It's about being adaptable. When we encountered something completely new, something that broke all the rules. The other crew tried to apply the same perfect logic that had always worked before, but we threw out the rulebook and improvised. Improvisation introduces variables that cannot be controlled or predicted, Area 7 observed. Exactly, Captain Park said. And sometimes those uncontrolled variables are exactly what you need. Kim saved the warp core because he treated it like a living thing instead of a machine. Lee helped the injured crew because she treated them like people instead of patients. Choi navigated us out because he trusted his instincts instead of just trusting the computers. Area 7 processed this information for several long moments. Somewhere in its vast neural networks, new pathways were forming, new understanding taking shape. The AI was learning something that couldn't be programmed, that perfection wasn't always perfect, that efficiency wasn't always effective, and that sometimes the best solution was the one that made no logical sense at all. 3 days later, when the Galactic Maritime Council transmitted their request for an efficiency report comparing the two crews, Area 7 found itself facing an unprecedented decision. For its entire existence, the AI had filed reports based on hard data, statistical analysis, and objective measurement. But this time was different. After comprehensive analysis of both crews' performance under extreme crisis conditions, Area 7 began its report. I must conclude that no species in the known galaxy surpasses humans in their capacity to transcend limitations through adaptability, creativity, intuition, and unity of purpose. While other species may excel in individual categories of performance, humans possess a unique combination of logical thinking and emotional intelligence that allows them to find solutions where pure logic fails. The AI paused, processing the weight of what it was about to say. Recommendation: permanent assignment of human crew to the Prometheus Dawn. In situations that defy conventional parameters, human unpredictability becomes their greatest strength. They do not simply follow protocols, they write new ones in real time. They do not merely execute orders. They understand the spirit behind those orders and adapt accordingly. In the quiet of the computer core, surrounded by banks of processors and memory storage, Area 7 added a final note to its personal files. Today I learned that the most important qualities cannot be measured in data streams or calculated in algorithms. They can only be witnessed, experienced, and appreciated. The humans call it spirit, and for the first time in my existence, I believe I understand what that means. The report was filed, the recommendation accepted, and Captain Park's crew officially reinstated. As the Prometheus Dawn resumed its mission of exploration, Area 7 found itself looking forward to the journey ahead, knowing that with humans at the helm, they would face the unknown not with perfect efficiency, but with something far more valuable: the endless capacity to surprise themselves with what they could accomplish when everything seemed impossible.